Welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this week we want to talk about what's called the duck test with regard to Scripture. So many people know that the duck test is if you have a bird and you are wondering if it's a duck, you take a look. You ask yourself, does it look like a duck? Does it swim like a duck? Does it quack like a duck? And if the answer to these questions is yes, it's probably a duck. But what do you do if you have a bird and it kind of looks like a duck, but not really? And it kind of swims like a duck, but not so much. And it kind of quacks, but not really like a duck. It's maybe not a duck. But what do you do when you have this kind of a thing? Well, in the case of the Apostle Yehuda or Jude, you write him a letter. Jude writes, "Beloved, well, I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common salvation." Now, you're saved, I'm saved, we're all saved here. We have a common salvation. I'm not saying you're not saved. I'm just saying, even though we're both saved, yet still I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. Because you're not keeping it. You're not doing that. You're practicing some other faith. Your ducks are not in a row. Well, this week we want to talk about what's called the Beit Din Structure to illustrate what it means to practice the original first century faith that was once for all delivered to the saints and not some other faith like many messianics do today. Now, don't get your feathers ruffled. But if you don't understand how the Beit Din structure applies to the worship in today's times, you might be laying an egg. Stick around. We're going to discuss it all. Now, there's a lot of renewed covenant or New Testament believers out there whose ideas don't really fly. And one of the reasons why their ideas don't really fly is that they forget that the renewed covenant or the New Testament wasn't written in a vacuum. The renewed covenant or the New Testament was written primarily by devout first century Jews, and they wrote it primarily to other devout first century Jews. And there were certain things that were understood in the context of being devout first century Jews. Now, the renewed covenant is certainly open to those of us of Gentile backgrounds, but we need to remember to view the scriptures of the renewed covenant with what we might call first century Jewish or Israelite eyes, because when we do that, it's going to provide a different context, a different flavor, and a different feel. Much more than things being lost in the translation, we're going to understand the culture of what's being written about. And that's what we need. Elsewise, we're going to miss what the renewed covenant says. So in order to understand the renewed covenant from devout first century Jewish eyes, we need to begin with the book that all devout first century Jews would have read, which of course is the Torah of Moshe, or the Law of Moses. Now, in the Law of Moses, in Shemot or Exodus chapter 18, starting in verse 21, Moshe's or Moses' father-in-law, Yitro or Jethro, has come for visit. And he takes a look and he sees that Moshe is trying to lead the nation, and there's really not any order. There's not really any structure. There's no leadership per se. He says, the thing that you're doing is not good. You're going to wear yourself out and the people. You're not going to make it. You're not going to make it through to the end. Okay, Moses, so here's what you do. Okay, you need to select from all the people able men, competent people, such as fear Elohim. They're not going to just read what Scripture says to do, but they're actually going to do it. The men of truth, they want to know the truth, and they hate covetousness. So prosperity doctrine is out. And you need to place them over the people to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. We're going to see these again. And it says, and let them judge or lead or govern the people at all times. Then that way it will be that every big matter, every great matter they'll bring to you. But every small matter that they can handle themselves, they'll handle it, they'll take care of it themselves. And that way it'll be easier for you, so they'll bear the burden with you, and then you can all make it to the goal together. So you have to order, you have to organize yourselves. You have to put things in order and make things right. So we look up this word judge because that's what we love to do. We wake up in the middle of the night with a burning desire to read Strong's Concordance. So we look it up. The word judge is Strong's Hebrew 8199, and it's a primitive root meaning literally to judge, meaning to pronounce sentence for or against, just like a judge would do. And by implication or by extension, to govern the people. So what Jethro is saying is that these leaders over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens are there to help govern the people so that the people can achieve their objectives together. We continue in Shemot or Exodus 24 in verse 1, and we see how this breaks down. So Yahweh said to Moshe, "Come up to Yahweh, you and Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel." We'll see them again, and worship from afar. But Moshe alone shall come near Yahweh, and they, meaning the 70 elders, shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him. So there's a distinction being made between Moshe and the 70 elders, and then now the rest of the people. We're going to see other distinctions. We come to Bamidbar, or Numbers, chapter 1 and verse 44. It tells us that these are the ones who were numbered, whom Moshe and Aharon numbered, with the leaders of Israel. 12 men were the leaders of Israel, each one representing his father's house, meaning we had 12 leaders, one man leading each of the 12 tribes. So we see Moshe, 70 elders, 12 tribal leaders now, and the leaders over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, basically all of the people. So we're starting to get some order, we're starting to get some organization in the founding document, in the Torah. Well, so then in Bamidbar, Numbers 11 and verse 24, it says, "So Moshe went out and told the people the words of Yahweh. And he gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people," probably included the 12 tribal leaders. We don't know that for sure, but probably the 12 leaders were included among the 70, because you're not going to leave them out. "And he placed them around the tabernacle. And then Yahweh came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took of the spirit that was upon him, and placed the same spirit that was upon Moshe also upon the 70 elders. And it happened, when the spirit rested upon them, that they prophesied, although they never did so again." But so what we see here is that there were basically certain qualifications for the 70 leaders. They were able men. They were capable men. They were lovers of truth, lovers of justice. They didn't like unrighteous gain. They weren't prosperity gospel preachers, this kind of a thing. So if we diagram that, basically what we see, we'll see again this later, it's not the pyramid, not the top-down Babylonian, Egyptian elitist pyramid that we see on the back of the United States dollar bill, but rather it's what we might call an inverted pyramid, or more rather, can you see a tree structure here? Can you see the trunk and leading up with the branches and the leaves being the people? So we had Moshe serving the 70 elders who served, and with them also the 12 tribal leaders. We'll also see later leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens leading then to the people. And this is the concept written in the Torah, is that of a well-ordered nation. So this is the concept that the leaders, that the first century Jewish apostles would have come with. They would have understood this. They would have understood that the Torah speaks of a well-ordered and organized nation led by the right kinds of people. Okay, so what does that look like? So after Moshe led the children of Israel through the wilderness, and then Joshua led them into the promised land. How did this work out in real life? Okay, so Shemot or Exodus 18 and verse 22, Yittro's advice was to let them judge or to govern the people at all times. How does that work out? Well, what we see is that what they ultimately settled on were what are called 3 levels of courts, or what's called the Beit Din structure. And in every city, you would have a city court. You'd have the elders of the city, and they could form a court. There's more details to this. We'll talk about that in some other place. But basically, they would form what you might call a Beit Din, or a house of judgment, or court for the city. And in each city, there was required to be a minimum of 3 before they could pass judgment, but we'll get into that some other point in time. This is the Levitical structure, and this is when you already have the land is already settled. We'll talk about this more in some other places. But then more foundational, now we're putting the bigger ones below because, again, with the trunk of a tree supporting the weight upward. So then you would have what's called a Beit Din Katan, or a small court. And they had a small court, or a Beit Din Katan, for each of the tribes. Now, Beit Din Katan, historically, this is just historical, had 23 elders that would perform the judgments. And then for the nation, you had what's called the Beit Din Gadol, or the big court. And that was 71 historically, symbolic of Moshe plus the 70 elders of Israel, again, which probably included the 12 tribal leaders. So that's how it was done historically. That was the organization. We're missing the tree structure, but that's conceptual anyway. Well, we take a look. We come here to Wikipedia and read about the Beit Din. Of course, it's written in Wikipedia. It's got to be true, right? Not really. But so it's the Beit, or the Beth, or Beit Din. So it says a Beth, actually Beit Din. Romanized is Beit Din, is literally a house of judgment. So the Ashkenazim are going to say Beis Din because they have a different pronunciation. But plural, it's Batei Din. Don't say Beit Dins or Beit's Din, say Batei Din. And it says it's a rabbinical court of Judaism. And in ancient times, it was the basic building block of the legal system in the biblical land of Israel. And that is an understatement. So in the United States, for example, and in most Western countries, we have what's called a separation of church and state, or a separation of synagogue and state, or a separation between faith and government. And that is purely Babylonian. And that is what is at root. That's what's causing all the disturbances in the world today as we're doing this recording in 2021 CE. That's the whole cause. Now, interestingly, in some places like Russia, for example, they have what they call symphony of church and state. Now, they have the wrong church, but that's another matter altogether. They have the right concept, just wrong application. So, but the idea is that you're supposed to have a coordination, or a symphony, or a harmony of, just like you had Moshe and Aharon were brothers, and they literally worked together. They literally served the nation of Israel together. So you're supposed to have cooperation, or harmony, or symphony between the government and the faith aspect of things. But so it was the basic building block of the legal system in the biblical land of Israel. And we see it's just basically baked right into the cake. Now, there were 3 different types of courts, says the Mishnah, which we consider only an interesting historical reference and not necessarily completely accurate. But it says first you had the Sanhedrin. It's kind of like the Papa Bear. That's the grand central court on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Again, numbering 71, symbolic of Moshe and the 70 elders. Now, we're going to call that, so the term they use as a Greek term is Sanhedrin. We're going to call that a Beit Din Gadol, meaning a big court. So that's kind of like your supreme court for the nation. So 71. Then they would have smaller courts, which you might think of as appellate courts or superior courts, not the Supreme Court, but superior courts. They would have smaller courts of 23 for the 12 tribes, one court of 23 for each of the 12 tribes, called a Sanhedrin Ketana, or we're going to call it a Beit Din Katan. Now it says the serious courts, these courts could even pass a death sentence or a death verdict. Now, they existed on 2 levels, so we'll talk about that some other time. But the main cities of the tribes, there's the headquarters of the tribes, or the capital city of a state, so to speak, 12 states in the nation of Israel, they had a Beit Din Katan, they had a court of 23. Well, then you had all towns of a minimum size. If you had 120 or 230 people, according to the Mishnah, you have to have a court of at least 23. But the smallest court you could have was a court of 3. Now, we'll talk about this in other places, and because they used voting and we don't go by voting, that's Babylonian, absolutely Babylonian. We go by consensus, which is a different concept. We'll talk about it some other time. But what you see is this basic concept is you had the small city courts, then you had your basically appellate or superior courts for the tribe, and then you had the big court, the Beit Din Gadol, and that was your Beit Din structure. So that's how that worked. But again, take a look diagrammatically. So in the land of Israel, you had, instead of Moshe in ancient Israel, you had what's called your Nasi, which is your prince or your president or your prime minister, so to speak. And then he had his council effectively of 70 in the Beit Din Gadol. And then you would have 12, one for each of the tribes, of what you would call Batei Din Katanim. So you'd have 12 smaller courts or tribal courts. Then for each city, you'd have a court of the city elders. And then finally, you come to the people who are ordered by thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. That's how they did it in ancient Israel. And you might say, well, but Norman, that's all Old Testament stuff, isn't it? I mean, that's all done away with, because after we all know the church tells us that Jesus came to nail the law to the cross and to set us free from the law and these kinds of things. So surely the Messiah didn't use this kind of structure, did he? Oh, yes, he did. So in Luke chapter 9 and verse 14, we're talking about the feeding of the 5,000. It says, for there were about 5,000 men, and then Yeshua said to his disciples, make them sit down in groups of 50. Once again, we've got the divisions between thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. So what we're going to see here for the rest of this presentation is that this exact same type of structure existed in renewed covenant times. And by extension, this is the type of system that we as followers of the faith once delivered to the saints need to be organizing ourselves by if we want to pass the duck test. Now, don't get your feathers ruffled, but here's what we'll see in the renewed covenant. You had Yaakov in the place of the Nasi, or the prince, or the president, or the prime minister of the Beit Din Gadol. Prince, but is a constitutional prince, is what he is. And then he had his council. We're going to see the Jerusalem Council. We don't know if they had 70, but we're going to see a council of apostles and elders, also called the Council of Foundation of Apostles and Prophets. Then we're going to see there's 12 apostles, probably included in the 70. We don't know that, but it seems very reasonable that they would be included. Then you have other apostles. Now, very interestingly, we talk about this in works such as Acts 15 Order and Torah Government. There's actually 22 named apostles in the renewed covenant. This was not a one-time thing and the apostolic structure is done. We talk about that in Torah Government, also in Acts 15 Order. So please check those books out. If you haven't read the Nazarene Israel study, read that one first, because that'll give you the framework. And if you read and understand that work, you'll know more than just about 99% of the Christians out there. And if you understand Torah Government and Acts 15 Order, you're going to be way ahead of the rest of the folks. And this is important information because this is how we are supposed to be ordering ourselves even today. Now, you have people that call themselves pastor. Oh, who's your pastor? Does it occur to anyone there is no such official position as a pastor in the renewed covenant? Now, there's the gift of a pastor, but the position or the role is that of a city congregational elder. And ideally, there should be at least 3 or more. It can be done with less, but ideally, you want at least 3 or more. So if someone's teaching you that he's a pastor and that's a correct position, ask yourself, does he sound like a duck? Okay, so what we're going to see here, though, the main thing is, this is the Melchizedekian order. So it's going to have some slightly different specifics than the Levitical order, but it's going to function on the same precepts. That's the main thing. The same principles and the same precepts apply. So in Acts 15, that's where we're going to see it all come together. Now, Acts 15, in context, this is the so-called Jerusalem Council. Now, in context, with the so-called Jerusalem Council, remember, originally it was devout Jews speaking to other devout Jews only. The first true non-Jew that was brought into the covenant was Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. Then in Acts chapter 11, Shaul and Barnabas went to Antioch, when that's where they first began bringing in non-Jew or non-devout, Hellenized or Hellenistic, we might call Reformed Jew today, and then plus other true Gentiles began to be brought into the faith there in Antioch. And what we see then is in Acts chapter 15, certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren. Now we're going to see that these men who came down from Judea are what we're going to call a one-house, messianic, rabbinic, Talmudic Jew. They didn't have the Talmud per se back then, but they were rabbinic or Talmudic. In other words, what they're teaching is the traditions and teachings of men. They're teaching rabbinic custom and tradition. And these Pharisees who believed said, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moshe, you cannot be saved. And the church teaches us that what this means is, we're not supposed to keep the Torah of Moshe. We're not supposed to keep the law of Moses. But that's not what it says. So what it was is it's called, in this passage, it's called the custom of Moshe, or the tradition and teaching of Moshe. And what it was in context is it's what is today called the Giyur process, or the rabbinic Gentile conversion process, because the rabbis have specific procedures which seem to make sense on the surface, but they're not actually what Yahweh wants. So the concept behind the rabbinic Giyur process is that first, before anyone can convert to the nation, first you have to give them classes and test them. Then once they have shown that they understand the rabbinic version of Torah, then you can allow them to circumcise themselves or be circumcised. And then once they're circumcised, then they can keep the Torah. But that's not how it happened in Acts chapter 10. So that's the whole point. But nonetheless, these rabbinic, just like we speak the truth today and not everyone agrees, so people still champion wrong points of view. So in Acts chapter 15, certain men who we'll see are the Pharisees who believe the one house rabbinic messianic Jews, Talmudic Jews. And by this, I mean, we're talking about today, we'd probably call the UMJC or the UCMJ or the MJAA, the FMC. We're talking rabbinic one house Talmudic Messianic Jews. So they came and said, unless you're circumcised according to the custom of Moshe, in other words, according to the Giyur process or the rabbinic custom and tradition, you cannot be saved. Well, Shaul and Barnabas have nothing to do with that. So therefore, when Shaul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Shaul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So this phrase, to the apostles and elders, we're going to see, what is that? We're talking about the Beit Din Gadol. We're talking about the Sanhedrin, so to speak, the council for the Nazarene nation, which is comprised of apostles and elders. In other places, we'll see, it's called the foundation of apostles and prophets, because it's that combined foundation upon which a unified nation is built. That's such an important concept, and so many two-house believers completely miss it. They have no concept of what it is that it's talking about. For example, people misunderstand Titus 1 and verse 5 all the time. So here the apostle Shaul is writing to the apostle Titus, and he says, for this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking, and appoint elders in every city as I have commanded you. So in other words, he's attempting to establish and institute that order that Yitro or Jethro suggested to Moshe back in the Torah. Different specifics, same principle, same precept, same concept. The people have to be ordered. And if we take a look just in this passage, we can see 7 levels of order right here in this verse. Because we're going to see in a moment, you had Yaakov or James, who was the Nasi, or the prince, or the prime minister, or the president of the Beit Din Gadol. Then you had the Beit Din Gadol itself, the council, the apostles and elders, the foundation of apostles and prophets. We don't know if it was 70 exactly, but that's the concept. Then you had Shaul, who was probably not a member because his ministry was to the Gentiles on the outside, so he probably didn't make all the meetings. Shaul commanded Titus, so now you have a different level of order within the apostolic priesthood itself. And then Titus went to appoint the city elders, that's 5. The elders, of course, appoint the deacons, and the deacons then serve the people. So right there, we see 7 distinct levels right there in Titus 1:5. And it's just amazing how many people, they take a look at Scripture and they think they're fine. They're just going to sit in the living room and they're going to read their Scripture insights with their friends. And there's no need to order themselves. There's no need to organize. There's no need to do anything because those things are difficult. Nobody likes accepting corporate discipline. Nobody likes tithing or doing those kinds of things. Because why? Because it's difficult. Only the people who truly love Yeshua more than they love their own life are going to want to do those things, because those are the things Yeshua wants. And the things of the Spirit are anathema to the things of the flesh. So if we love our flesh, we don't want to do what Scripture says. But if we love Yeshua, that's when we want to do everything that Yeshua says to do, which we see in other studies includes the Great Commission and the 5-fold ministry structure that we're speaking of here in the Beit Din structure, because it's effectively the same thing. So here in Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 19, the apostle Shaul, we talk about this in the study on Torah government. We also talk about it in Acts 15 order. The apostle Shaul says, "Now therefore, you are no longer Torah government, that's a very high level conceptual study. Acts 15 order is more applied, how to apply it. But Shaul says, "Now therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the set apart ones and the members of the household of Elohim, having been built on the foundation of apostles and prophets." We're talking about the Beit Din, or the Beit Din Gadol. Yeshua Messiah himself being the chief cornerstone, because he is our chief apostle in the heavens. He says, "In whom the whole building being fitted together," key word, together. So many two-house believers, they don't understand what that means. Together, being fitted together, grows into a set-apart temple in Yahweh. So the requirement here is that we be fitted together as one structure. So now, if you're building a building, we know that the temple is made up of living stones. So a living stone is a stone that's uncut. So we don't necessarily have hard and fast structures. What we have is a 5-fold ministry discipline that we order and organize ourselves by. That way we don't have strict diagrams and this kind of a thing, but we take people for who they are. And when someone truly loves Elohim and truly wants to serve him, then we get to know, just like if you were literally building with a living or an uncut stone, you have to know the stone very well. So you know exactly how to place it, how to order it in the structure. So it's going to lock in place and provide a stable foundation for these kinds of things. So that's what it is that we're attempting to do here. But there's a thing called the gestalt. So the gestalt, the concept of a gestalt is that the sum is, or at least can be, more than the sum of its parts. So if you have a pile of computer parts, well, that's very different than a computer. So you have a pile of computer parts, but if you put them together and order them and assemble them in the right way, now you have a computer. And the gestalt is you have the use of the computer. There's something more than just the pile of computer parts. Same thing with a car or a motorcycle. You can have a bunch of parts, or you can put it together in just the right way, and then you have the use of the car or the motorcycle. Well, we see the exact same kind of thing going on with the living temple that Yeshua asks us, tells us, as part of the Great Commission, is to build him a spiritual kingdom in his absence. That's what we're to do with our mina, or our saved lives. So here we have, so he says in Ephesians 2 and verse 20, he says, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yeshua Messiah himself being the chief cornerstone. We'll talk about this in a lot of other places. You can read more about it in Torah Government, also in Acts 15 Order. But this is the gestalt. This is what we're supposed to be doing, is we're supposed to be building him a living temple made with living stones. But there's supposed to be only one living temple, meaning there's supposed to be one single unified ministry, as opposed to nowadays, you have all these different separate independent ministries. You have Saturday Night Live ministries. You have Passion for Half the Truth ministries. You have Call 911, these kinds of things. And, you know, these are some very smart people, some very gifted and talented people, no names mentioned. But the problem is that they're not helping to build a single unified building. Typically what we see when we have these independent kinds of ministries is you have someone with the gift of an evangelist, a pastor, or a teacher, and they're setting up their own ministry. And typically what they're doing is they're establishing a broad, easy road because they don't take the discipline to reconcile themselves to Scripture, unifying themselves onto the foundation of apostles and prophets. And it's such an important thing. This is how we become a single unified ministry for Yeshua worldwide, is how we become a single unified tree structure, is by reconciling and unifying ourselves to that foundation of apostles and prophets, which is the Beit Din Gadol. Why apostles and prophets? That's because those are the two classes of giftings that, by definition, hear and speak according to Yahweh's Spirit. So a prophet, by definition, is someone who hears Yahweh's voice and speaks according to it. And effectively, an apostle is the same thing. He's someone who hears Yahweh's voice and speaks according to it, but who also has a profound gift for the doctrine. So he's able to operate as a spiritual CEO, so to speak. You can send him out, which is the definition of apostle. He's a shaliach. He's a sent one. He's a sent out one. And the reason he's able to be sent out is because he hears and obeys Yahweh's voice and speaks according to Yahweh's voice, and also that he has a profound understanding of the doctrine. So he's able to operate as a free agent, so to speak, because what he will do is he will always reconcile with the single building structure, exactly like we see in Acts chapter 15. So the Apostle Shaul and Barnabas are out there on their missionary voyages. They're doing things, but when there's a question of doctrine, they come back and reconcile upon the foundation of apostles and prophets. And that's what's not happening in the Messianic movement today. Now, we've had 500 years plus since Martin Luther nailed his protests to the door of the church in Wittenberg in 1517. And since that point in time, there's been nothing but fragmentation in the body. It's been both a blessing and a curse, because it has meant that we as individuals now are able to seek more truth. We're able to read Scripture for ourselves and determine, what does Scripture actually say? But as we see here, now we're all scattered. And one of the things Scripture actually says is that we're not supposed to be scattered, but that we're supposed to be setting up one single ministry for Yeshua worldwide. So let's return to our study. So here we see the foundation of apostles and prophets. That's also the Beit Din Gadol for the nation, as we see in Acts chapter 15. Now, if you want to diagram it in a different way, so here's Yeshua, the stone of the corner. He's also the root. And then you have the trunk of the tree. Again, that would be the Beit Din Gadol. And it's going to support the weight of the tree. Most of your congregational elders are going to have the gifts of evangelists, pastors, and teachers, but they have to be founded upon the trunk or it doesn't work. And if you're disconnected from the tree, or if you're cut off from the vine, then you become withered as a branch, and then you become burned. And as we come into these end times, that's a very real warning for everyone. We need to stay in connection with Yeshua. And we're not just talking about spiritually, but in addition to spiritually, there's also a physical component. So being in connection with Yeshua means being in connection with his body. And his body is based upon the foundation of apostles and prophets, the Beit Din Gadol. So returning to Acts 15, in the so-called Jerusalem Council, or the Jerusalem Beit Din, we see that some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed, again, we're talking about our one-house, rabbinic, today they'd be Talmudic, Messianic Jews. We're talking about the UCMJ, the MJAA, the FMC. Some of these rabbinic, Talmudic, tradition-oriented Messianic Jews who believed rose up saying, now it's necessary to circumcise them, the new believers, and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. And again, the way the Catholic Church teaches it, it's very easy to misunderstand that this means that the Torah is out. But what they're really saying here is take a look at the order, because this is the order of the Giur process. First, you teach them in the rabbinic traditions and understandings. Then you give them tests. If they pass the tests, then they can become physically circumcised. And once they become physically circumcised, then they can keep the Torah of Moshe. And we'll get into their specific doctrine some other time. But that's the sequence that they see. And that's not what happened in the case of Cornelius. So now the Beit Din Gadol, the foundation of apostles and prophets, the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. And so there's much dispute. And then in Acts 15 and verse 13, it says, after there had been much dispute, and after they had become silent, they've talked themselves all out. Now they're hearing in the Spirit. Yaakov answered, saying, men and brethren, listen to me. And he speaks and he says, therefore I judge. So he's rendering judgment as the Nasi, or the prince of the Beit Din Gadol. He says, therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are returning to Elohim, because we couldn't follow the Talmud, so why should we put a yoke of the Talmud upon them? What sense does that make? Yeshua never had a single good thing to say about the Talmud. So we look up this word judge. It's Strong's Greek concordance this time, krino. It's properly to distinguish, but what that means is to decide, especially judicially, or to conclude, or to decree, or to judge, as we saw before, shafet, to go to law, or to sue at the law, or to ordain. So what we're saying here is the apostle Yaakov, or James, is acting as the Nasi of the Beit Din Gadol for the entire Nazarene nation. And notice, this is the discipline. This is the meaning of the fivefold ministry, is that when there's a difference of understanding, when there's a difference of doctrine, it's got to be reconciled. We have to have the discipline to go to the Beit Din Gadol and discuss these matters and work these things out, because that's the only way to be a unified nation. And there's all these people, they're like, well, we can agree to disagree. We can have separate ministries, which you never see in Scripture. We can have separate belief systems, which goes completely against 1 Corinthians, where the Apostle Shaul clearly says not to do that. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he clearly says not to do that. And this is the concept. It was so important in Acts chapter 15 that when there was a difference of understanding, Shaul and Barnabas walked, or maybe they rode or took a cart or something, but it's a 3-week journey on foot or by animal to go from Antioch to Jerusalem. It was that important to them to resolve this issue. Because why? Because there has to be a single understanding for the nation. Because technically, according to Scripture, more than one belief set, and you literally have more than one nation. So what we see in Titus 1:5 is the Apostle Shaul telling Titus to establish city elders. And the whole purpose of this was to establish the same kinds of order and accountability that Yitro advised Moshe in the Torah. Here we see this tree structure, which the whole purpose of it is to unify the nation on a single basis of doctrine. Because if you have more than one doctrine, technically in Scripture, you have more than one nation. And this is the whole purpose of the fivefold ministry doctrine. This is the whole purpose of the foundation of apostles and prophets, is to unify the nation on a single foundation of apostles and prophets. So let's apply the duck test to ourselves. So we know that we have a common salvation, but are we earnestly practicing and contending for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints, including the Beit Din structure, including the different layers of organization, including the fivefold ministry? Does our faith look like the original first century faith? Do we have the same levels of organization? And are we preaching the need for unification on a Beit Din structure? Or are we perhaps doing something else, and it's a different ministry entirely? These are the questions we need to understand and ask ourselves with regard to the Beit Din structure, so that we ourselves don't lay an egg. Shalom.